Okay, so here we are, the evening of September 2nd, 2024, Labor Day. I don't know what number of forum this is, but we're well into the 20s, I think. So I want to start out with something that's purely, well, it's very entertaining, but also very instructive. I stumbled as so much uh, in my quest seems to be just stumbling into something. I stumbled into a series called Chaos on TV. I think it's now running on Netflix. Chaos with a K, and it's set in present day Crete, the island ruled by Poseidon, the Greek version of Enki, Lord of the Seas. And it depicts the Greek myths of the gods and many of the Greek stories in modern form. So it's an, and of course the Greek pantheon and stories are an update in their centuries of the Mesopotamian tales. So here we have these gods that have totally physical human bodies, just like in the tablets, and except that they're immortal. Well, very much like what the tablets say about their having long lives through what they call the bread of life and the water of life, which we can translate as advanced anti-aging medicine. And they have magical powers. Of course, in the original, they had highly technological, extraordinary powers like the ability to fly in vehicles and energy beam weapons. Okay, but they're very human, emotional, irrational, jealous, selfish, just like in the tablets. And they live separately on Mount Olympus, like the gods in Mesopotamia. They had sacred precincts within the city. They live separately, but they also could mix it up with the humans, which they do in this series Chaos. So here it is. Our earliest history, our earliest stories, which apparently we can't forget or don't want to forget. And here it is getting played out. I don't know when this was first shot. It might have been 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. But here it is, 21st century, and we're still reveling, in these great stories. So look it up if it like all series, it gets pretty boring after about 3 or 4 episodes. They keep doing the same shtick all over again. But it's interesting to see, Prometheus there, tied to the rock, and the raven is chewing away his liver, and he's talking to you, the audience. Okay. Wonder if, where's Linda? Oh, I forgot this. I usually send her. Give me a moment. I'm going to go off recording I'm going to pause. Andy post. Within a few days, it'll be on the website. So here's a tidbit that caught my eye. There's an extremely rare condition called progeria that causes rapid aging. Very few children born with this genetic condition live for very long. I mean, they get old and they get wrinkled, and they die of usually of cardiac disease. But in mice, the researchers have recently found a cure that involves the editing of a single codon. Hi, Linda. So, hi. We're not. So, a single codon is curing progeria in mice. Now, and it's possible that even though it's a very, very rare condition, somebody will be inspired to, to bring this to human treatment. But the message here is that genetic engineering keeps advancing rapidly. To me, that means that the achievements of Henke and Nienmach in their laboratory become more plausible because of how much more we can do all the time. And it also means that the discovery in our DNA of the evidence of the tampering, is getting close, is more likely. It's getting closer too. Linda, can you hear us okay?
Mm-hmm.
So that was, a little bit of illumination. Now here's something very cool. Someone, I don't know what his discipline is, just called a researcher. Guy named Sweatman, University of Edinburgh. He's analyzing a calendar found in Göbekli Tepe and analyzing marks that up until now were kind of ignored on this calendar. Now it's a solar-lunar calendar. It involves both the sun and the lunar cycle. Now, just point aside, the Jewish calendar is a solar-lunar calendar, and it was promulgated over 5,000 years ago in the city that we now call Nippur, but then it was called Nibriki, which means the jumping off place, the connecting place to Nibiru, the planet of the cross. And it was the center of it was Enlil's center and the center, the point of communication with Nibiru. So it's a calendar from around those times. And what he found in these V-shaped carvings in this calendar in Göbekli Tepe was a story of a comet hitting the Earth from a meteor stream at around 11,000 BCE. And it goes on to speculate that for humans, the comet probably also led to differences in lifestyle and agriculture that helped usher in the rise of civilization as we know it. Now, according to the tablets, after the flood, that's when Enki and Enlil decided to give the arts and sciences of civilization to humankind so that they could rebuild. Reeve has joined us. Hi, Reeve. Why don't you unmute yourself? Oh. So, and so that is completely consonant with the story from the tablets and coincides date-wise, because from the king lists in the tablets, date of the deluge was 11,356 BCE. So we have a calendar from Göbekli Tepe, that coincides totally with the king lists and the tablets for a cataclysmic event. Whether it's what this scholar thinks was a comet, or what we're thinking was the close pass of Nibiru that caused floods, volcanoes, and mega tsunamis. That's a small detail. What kind of catastrophe it was? Certainly, it was a big deal. So that is really interesting, and pardon the phrase, but God knows what is going to be revealed if and when that site in Turkey is ever totally excavated. Who knows what it'll take to get the authorities to keep that. Basically, it's archaeological censorship that's going on. But most censorship doesn't last forever. It may outlive us, but it won't last forever. So I'm open for any thoughts before the next topic pops up. Okay, now we have speculated, at least I have, that the indigenous peoples of the world are the descendants of those who resisted or escaped from, or both, Anunnaki civilization. Okay. And I wouldn't say reverted, that they reclaimed their connection with their Homo erectus inner selves, and restored to a great extent their oneness in nature. And a social scientist named James Scott just died, who is in his own way in support of this. He was not exactly a renegade because he was a professor at Yale, but he was a proponent of anarchism, not the bomb throwing, chaotic kind, but societies that live without hierarchy, without rule from above. And he got there by going out into the field and studying semi-primitive peoples. He didn't reach the tribes deep in the Amazon that were not contacted, but pretty primitive indigenous folks in the highlands of Southeast Asia, for example. And he says they're not primitive. They migrated to a strategic adaptation to centralized state power. Because in many of those locations, they were within countries that had governments that were active and trying to do things, including to these people, and they had their ways of resisting. So he built a paradigm applicable to stateless people like Berbers and Bedouins. The resistance of disparate communities to state power over centuries of modern history, he saw anarchism at work. And he wrote a book, Two Cheers for Anarchism, which celebrated the spirit of cooperation among people without a hierarchy. So even in academia, the the idea penetrates that there is a valid and valuable other way of living. Okay. Next, another example of that not all AI is bad. This is AI has recently been applied to the tablets, particularly those related to the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, the reason that Gilgamesh was written and rewritten in all the successive cultures of Mesopotamia, and why it's, I think, a central story, is that the theme, his quest for the long life of the gods, that he felt he was entitled to because he was his mother was a goddess and he was a demigod, king of Uruk. And he thought he was entitled to it, and so he was. The story is his quest to go to Nibiru, to go to Lebanon, where the spaceport had been built after the Mesopotamian spaceports were buried in mud before the flood, by the flood. Okay, and the story is he goes to Lebanon, to the mountains, to Baalbek, and defeats the guardian of the spaceport, kills the guardian of the spaceport, but does not get off. Anyway, his quest resonates with the anguish of all of humankind, who saw the nearly infinite lifetimes of the gods, and were living with the painful knowledge of their own mortality. And here is this hero, this king, trying to fight his mortality. I think that's what gave the story its lasting power and why it got retold in all the cultures. So with AI, they've been looking into what appears to be about 30% of the story that's kind of missing. That's a guess, of course. And it's powering searches for segments of Gilgamesh in disparate tablets and little fragments, little pieces. Actually, side note, much of the Mesopotamian tale that we've been able to put together is because the totally fragmentary record often overlaps. So here's this tablet and this isolated tablet, but the end of this one is the same as the beginning of this one, and so it's possible to piece together continuous stories. So they've been able to find hundreds of missing words and lines in other tablets that seem to fit into the story of Gilgamesh. Before 2018, 5,000 tablet fragments were matched. and this AI team has matched another 1,500 since then. They've added about 100 lines to the epic. One of them is interesting, is a whole new episode in which after they've um, Gilgamesh and his companion Enkidu kill the monster, which may be really destroying the robot protector of the spaceport. After that, they traveled to Nippur, in other words, which in those days was Nibriki, as I said, the religious center of Mesopotamia, and they appealed to Enlil because that was his base, Nibriki. But he was not. They wanted to appease Enlil and get his support for their mission to go and plead to An to be granted the long life. But Enlil was not happy with this. I wouldn't exactly call it sacrilege, but their attempt to break into the spaceport. And they didn't succeed. But that's an interesting angle that they couldn't lift off, so they went to Enlil for some further help, and he told them to get lost. It also included detail that Gilgamesh's companion tried to get him not to destroy the protective device. And there's a prayer from Gilgamesh's mother to the sun god, who's also the god of the sun, is also the god of rocketry in Mesopotamia. So for protection going through the tall cedars of Lebanon. Gilgamesh's mother, a minor goddess, had earlier told him in the epic that An was not going to grant him the long life. So Assyriologists and other scholars agree that more of Gilgamesh and other literature remain undiscovered in storerooms and unexcavated historic sites. We can only think that the more that gets uncovered, the more confirmation there will be for our Mesopotamian tale. There's another line that the AI researchers have uncovered that has Utnapishtim, who's the Mesopotamian, one of the Mesopotamian versions of Noah in Genesis. And interestingly, the builder of the ark was probably also a king of Uruk many generations before Gilgamesh. So that's an interesting connection in the epic, that he meets many generations later. He meets the builder of the ark. Well, in the tablets, the builder of the ark, for his loyalty, was granted the long life by Enki. So that's consistent with his still being around 1,000 years later, when Gilgamesh makes this appeal to him. It all fits. you know, maybe I've got a selective ignorance here, but as far as I can tell, nothing is coming out more recently tends to um, challenge or be in conflict with the Mesopotamian story. Now, you may recall that, in the story, we find the roots for the visceral hatred and disgust in the light-skinned people for the dark skin. And I pulled off a shelf recently a book by Alan Patton. Cecily, you're probably familiar with all of it, right?
Yeah.
Anybody read Too Late, the Phalarope? The phalarope is a bird, a South African bird. Anyway, it's set in Union of South Africa, in before liberation, in apartheid times, and the abhorrence and disgust in the whites, particularly the Dutch descendants, not the English. This is all set amongst the Boers, for the native peoples, is codified in law, and one of the specific laws is that it's a severely punishable crime for a white man to touch a black woman. That's like not only will that, what's the word, miscegenation, not only will that get you in prison for a long time, but it will make you an outcast for the rest of your life. And the story really condenses a fundamental human reality into the life of the hero, in the protagonist, because there's a guy. Yeah.
Sorry, I missed Mike. Where and when was this story from?
In apartheid South Africa.
So recent times.
Yeah. This was after the Boer War. Matter of fact, it takes place. Well, with the Boer War, the Dutch descendants were pushed into the hinterlands, and this actually takes place shortly after World War II. So this hero, this lieutenant in the police force, is drawn to a black girl, and in his case, it makes sense, because he's a very an intense, passionate guy, whose civilized wife is only occasionally able to embrace him in a fully loving way, and that sets him up for vulnerability to this enticing black girl. And I haven't gotten to the point yet where it all comes out and he and his family are destroyed. Um, um, so we've speculated um, that the white to black antipathy is largely because there's historically, but also genetically, inside each of us, each of the white folks, there's a black person, and that when we see living present day black people, we're reminded of our original state uh, of being um, inferior and shamed, um, slaves to the Anunnaki, and our visceral disgust is we're trying not to be reminded of that. Um, but in rereading this book, I realized that there's another source, maybe just as powerful, um, for resisting the full humanity of people with darker skins, um, in the people with light skins, and that is that it's not only a reminder of how we once were, but also in a bad way, the trouble that we were in as slaves of the Anunnaki. But it reminds us all also of our life in nature, our life, you might say before the fall, before corruption, before original sin, which is to say the genetic manipulation. Um, um, that it's painful to remember that because it has a powerful pull. I mean, who doesn't want to just go off and live at peace and harmony in the woods or whatever natural place is best for you? For me, it's the woods and streams. Um, um, because to do that, we have to give up civilization. We have to give up all the comforts. We have to give up all the advantages, or so it seems. Um, and I, I got a reminder of how we live in that tension. I'm gonna a little personal history here, but it's revealing of this tension. There was a time many years ago, when I decided that in order to get, you might say, totally reoriented um, in in my adventure through life, it was time to go on a vision quest, an updated version of the native rite of passage. Um, and that was the one that I was contemplating was going to be directed by a guy who was quite schooled in native ways, in North American native ways. And as I was preparing for it, I realized, no, not right now, because I'm so civilized. I've gotten so used to, living in these enclosed spaces, that it's affected me so deeply that I won't really be able to connect as a solo adventurer, fasting and doing ceremony in the natural world for 4 days. I realized that I would just be kind of holding my breath. I'd just be protected, until I could get back to civilization. So what am I going to do to be able to really, immerse myself in the natural world. And came to my attention that the thing to do would be to take the 1 week course in the tracker school. Now, the guy who developed the tracker school actually just died last week, John Brown, Tom Brown Jr. And he'd been raised in his adolescence by a man, remarkable man who was an Apache scout who found they crossed paths in the Pine Barrens in the wilds of southern New Jersey, which was, and that's where the tracker school was located. And he he developed a high level of skill in himself, and then he taught it to the teachers, and then his teachers taught the school in primitive living, how to catch food, how to get pure water, how to make clothing out of hides, how to track, how to stalk game, basically how to live with nothing. He himself would be known to go off into the woods with nothing but his clothing and shoes, and come back a couple of weeks later looking hale and hearty and having put on a few pounds. And he was a little bit of a fanatic. One of his lines, I remember, one of the classes that he taught, I mean, it was kind of a joke, but it wasn't. He said, well, if you go into the woods with a blanket and a knife, you might as well take a Winnebago. But he was fantastic skill. I remember going on a little bit of tracking with him, and he found the spot on the branch of a tree off this trail and showed us where a little bird had perched before taking off. Almost invisible marks of a small bird's claws on the bark of the twig. Anyway, in this course, you learn the primitive skills, fire making, small traps, so a lot of it hands-on, some of it just by demonstration, like preparing hides and things. And it's not like in 1 week you can develop all the skills that allow you to survive in the wilds. But what it teaches you is that with enough practice, with enough work, you could develop those skills. You could become a primitive man or woman and able to survive without, without your phone, and without your gun. You could do it. It is not, even now, it is not beyond us. And that equipped me enough to then go on the vision quest. And I knew I could melt into the forest and get something out of the experience. I remembered recently how fully I melted in. By the fourth day, I was so tuned in and responding, talking to the trees and whatnot, that it wasn't until late afternoon that I realized that I was going about without my glasses. I'm pretty myopic, and it just hadn't occurred to me that I wasn't seeing in detail. I didn't need to. I was feeling my way around, So, so the school had worked for me, but what this says is that before the imposition of a traumatized, civilized order on the natural hominin. Um, it was a very complete and essentially happy life. Um, the actually we had evidence of that fairly recently. Tom Paine wrote that the natives were a heck of a lot happier than the colonists. Um, and Ben Franklin was concerned that whenever um, uh, 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 a colonist had to live with the native peoples for a while, um, and were adopted by a tribe, maybe as children, you know, whenever they were rescued and brought back to civilization, as fast as they could, they ran back into the forest and tried to find their tribe. Um, so that tension, I think, is also represented. You know, it shows up in how we don't want to um, don't want to be reminded of those times by seeing people whose skin was just like ours was when we were first made. I mean, we do know that the original inhabitants uh, who got to Europe out of Africa were dark-skinned hunter-gatherers, and only later were they pushed around and pushed out by lighter-skinned, taller uh, people from the Middle East. So that was a big. Uh, I recommend the book to you because in a visceral way, it because in this guy who the protagonist, I mean he's horrified by his inability to stay within quote the law end quote to remain um, true to the obligation to stay civilized, because it is really in contradiction to his deep nature, which is touched um, by this black girl. Now, here's something that written by a guy named Pritam Lasker in a website that Linda has turned me on to called Medium, and um, it's about an apocryphal text called the Apocalypse of Adam, which contains a pretty weird and wild alternate story for the origin of mankind. And I don't want to give it too much play because it is pretty. It's almost a conspiracy theory, but it's an example of a Gnostic text, a text based in the deep knowing of the Gnostics. And I'm going to read the conclusion of this article because it goes beyond this one particular, as I'm saying, pretty wild and crazy text. Because it involves a reimagining of human origins, the nature of God, the path to salvation. This type of writing urges followers to seek enlightenment through knowledge, through knowing, gnosis, rather than blind faith, which is belief. initiating a process of spiritual emancipation by understanding their true nature and the realities of their imprisonment. True, deep, natural nature and imprisonment in civilization. So these texts, I'm not familiar with them very much. The Gnostic Bibles, but there was, while there was Gnostic Christianity before then, there was Gnostic Judaism. There are many texts. I don't know how many have been found, lost, whatnot, but they may be useful as one of the wedges against encrusted belief as we wake up, as civilization wakes up. So this perspective, the guy goes on, invites a critical examination of traditional religious doctrines, proposing a journey of self-discovery and rebellion against divine despotism. In other words, the truth lies within. Just basically pay attention to what's inside. The light is there. But Gnosticism advocates for an internal revolution where liberation is achieved through a relentless pursuit of knowledge and the realization of one's inherent divinity rather than worship and submission, which is what the lords from Nibiru tricked humanity into, submission. This call to awaken and reclaim one's divine rights offers a potent, controversial pathway to spiritual fulfillment and autonomy. Hear, hear. So there was one more item that came across my desk in the last 2 months since we last met that doesn't directly shine a light on our theory of diverted evolution and all of the history that unfolds after those initial events in the African laboratory. But it shines some light on it. So I'll get into this astounding discovery. But the question, it's a legitimate question. How could we really be reliving so accurately without conscious knowledge, the life and the suffering and the traditional religious belief systems of our earliest ancestors so many thousands of years ago? How could it be? How could it be so accurately reproduced? And part of the answer to that is that, to me, in addition to the more or less obvious means of transmission through the ages, laws, customs, stories of some kind, the inheritance of the state of being traumatized. You can pass on the trauma state generation to generation to generation. You can pass on an oversensitivity to shame. generation to generation to generation. So those are psychological and cultural means of transmission, which we can pretty well understand. But my thought is that their power is magnified by the fact, I think it's a fact, that the field of the species is timeless. It holds, basically remembers everything that happens. Um, and so there is a template that was formed when we were formed and in our earliest times. And I think there's some, there's potentially evidence for that in what we see in process of development, the process of natural evolution. So here's what like jumped out at me. There's a species of termite that was just discovered. And it has a means of protecting its colony from invading species, other invading termite species. And it does this through a murder-suicide drama. The insect has on its back a sac containing an inactive compound and a smaller component, a little compartment, with an enzyme. And when it's threatened, when it's attacked, the compartment with the enzyme opens, activates the compound, which spurts out a toxic liquid and kills the attackers and itself. Now, I just can't believe, and I know, like, who could really believe that something so specific and so unique and so smart could be developed through random mutations? Sorry, I cannot go there. Sorry, Mr. Darwin. It was a great idea you had, but it wasn't enough. And what it means to me is that when one species, develops out of another, its predecessor, it's not just the chromosomes. The predecessor species has made an imprint in the field, and the field has generative intelligence. The field is constantly running experiments. It's as if the field says, well, let's try this. This might be a good idea, So you might say, we can take, some people take reassurance, and they find it good news that God has a plan. That's nice. Only the problem is the plan is an experiment. That's the plan. And so it's constantly learning. And so the immaterial field held the reality of that predecessor species. And so I think that's what's happening, in natural evolution. So it's not much of a stretch to say, well, okay, the field is doing the same thing with us. And by the way, you might say, well, maybe we're an experiment. Okay? Maybe maybe the field is interested in seeing what happens when you take a hominin species that's gotten quite advanced technologically, um, and which evolved originally, by the way, in the third orbit from the sun, which is the only way that Nibiru could be where it is now, and Earth could be where it is now, and the asteroid belt could be where it is now. Okay, it's really, I would say, absolutely the only way, but it's the most probable by far. So you have a species which originated in the third orbit and had to adapt to a very, very unnatural world and traumatizing circumstances. What happens when that species is interbred with an unspoiled natural living species? What happens then? You know, and who knows? Maybe the visitors that keep coming, the the aliens from not from Nibiru, but from way out there in the galaxy, who keep visiting Earth. Maybe they're one way in which the field is checking in on this experiment. So as it's a bit of a stretch, but to go from that crazy termite, to understanding, how we are the way we are. But I think one story helps to support the other. Well, those are all the things that appeared to me to be relevant to our journey, in the last couple of months. Linda, yes.
I missed the first few minutes. Have you given us any updates on the movie?
Um, yeah, yes, yes and no. The key, um, um, the key to moving things ahead faster, the key person passed on. Okay. But his son is trying, is committed to being of what help he can, and he has someone that he's known since childhood, you know, mega producer, who could be um, uh, who could present the screenplay to both to Spielberg and to Tom Hanks. Um, and here's the way the story of the story, the story of the movie has been this unbelievably improbable chain of events. Okay. And here's another improbable piece of the story that may, it's something that's going on right now that may inspire the guy who's promised to help, who's entangled in an awful, in addition to dealing with his entanglement in his father's estate, and running a complex business of his own, okay, and dealing with his own anxieties and his grief, is in a horrendously complex mess, the kind that can only happen in Hollywood, where creative people and money people are at war with each other, and one of the component production companies is a subsidiary of a conglomerate that went bankrupt in the middle of all of this. So here's this film that's ready to go. It's been presented at a festival, but it can't be promoted because of this financial, legal, total mess. Okay, that is quite possible is going to get unentangled and resolved with the help of my son. How does this happen? Okay. My son's he's a legal associate in the bankruptcy section of a firm in New York who has probably the city's biggest entertainment section. So those two departments working together may be able to untangle this, which would free up Frank's mind and create a well of gratitude, which may inspire him to do more than he otherwise would do for the hybrids. We'll see. It could have stranger things have happened. But the fact that I could do this for him, for a movie which, by the way, was written by the screenplay is written by the same guy who wrote The Hybrids screenplay. So and also entertainment attorney, one of his clients is doing a film with another very, very big producer. And when that is further rolling along, he's says that he could approach that producer through his client. So I have more than one route that may happen, and so I'm getting my further training in patience and faith. Patience and faith. Okay. Now, I could, I think so that's where the movie stands. I think I told you that I was writing a children's book to be published around the time that the movie was released. And as it was writing itself, it became way too much for a book for small children. So I'm not sure what it is going to be. It could be an animated short. But if you want, I could provide some entertainment by reading the story. Hands up, interested? Linda?
I'm in.
Yes, all right, let me, maybe I can,
Yes, do it, do
How,
it.
how long is it, Mike?
maybe 10 minutes tops.
Okay. We're not
Oh,
talking an hour. That sounds fine.
Well, I don't know if let me see if I can find a printed out version. but I have to bring it up on my screen, so I'm gonna go out of full screen. Move this over. Bring it up here. Hang on. Shouldn't take long. Okay. Let me see, it's 1, 2, 3, 3.5 pages. Okay. So it's called 12, numeral 12. That's okay. So Friday afternoon, as the bus nears their stop, the hushed back and forth between brother and sister is getting intense. Listen, Grandpa's staying the whole weekend. For sure, he'll figure this out, whispers Art. So they burst through the kitchen door. Snack time. Their grandfather's in the living room. Mandy, the girl, shouts, Grandpa, we've discovered a huge mystery. We need your help. With big smile, grandfather replies, I'll sure try, but first some hugs. Gathered around the kitchen table, the siblings spill it out, talking over each other. It's about the number 12. It's showing up everywhere. Adding to the mystery, everyone we ask about it blows us off. Grandpa's eyes widen with surprise and interest, slowly, one at a time. So first, Mandy. We're in a science unit on measurement. Inches in a foot, 12. Months in the year, 12. Hours on the clock, 12. I asked how come, and my teacher said, it's just coincidence. Really? And then Art. In Bible class, we just learned that the Israelites were divided into 12 tribes for the 12 sons of Jacob, grandson of Abraham. Art goes on. The apostles of Jesus, 12. And in Revelations, the 12 gates of the city of God. They continue, taking turns. And there are 12 all around the house. Eggs in a carton, rolls in a package, notes in a piano octave. And Dad just bought 12 roses for Mom's anniversary at her 12-step meeting. What's going on with all the 12s? Grandpa's grinning. Oh, it's even more, you know. Abraham's other son, Ishmael, also had 12 sons. And these days, in a criminal case, the jury has 12 members. And the signs of the zodiac, the kids interrupt and they shout, 12. He says, you're right. It is mysterious, especially with everyone saying it's nothing more than coincidence. Tomorrow, it's going to be rainy. Seems like a perfect time for the story that unravels your mystery. Saturday morning. Mandy and Art wolf down their breakfast in record time and snuggle against Grandpa on the couch. Clearing his throat, he begins. First, the background for the story. About 100 years ago in the Holy Land, a Bible class came to a passage in the book of Genesis that tells of the time when there were giants in the earth. Art wonders aloud, giants in the earth. Where did I hear that? Maybe in your own Bible class, suggests Grandpa. He goes on, a boy named Zechariah, about your age, raised his hand, seriously confused. The roots of the word in biblical Hebrew being translated as giants, Nephilim, really meant those who came down. Zechariah's teacher brushed off his earnest question, making the lad even more curious. In fact, it led Zechariah to a lifetime of study, reading, translating, and traveling. By the way, Cecily was one of the people traveling with Zechariah around the world. When he grew up, he wrote amazing books about all the things he discovered. Zechariah became fascinated with the tales from Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, the collection of cultures that gave birth to the culture of the Jews of the Bible. Mandy perks up. The Bible says Abraham's father was a priest of the god of Ur. Was that in Mesopotamia? Grandpa gives her a hug. Exactly. In fact, Ur was the greatest of its cities. Art dashes off, returns with his tablet, pulls up a map. Ur was located in what's now Iraq. Feeling proud of his grandkids, Grandpa continues, in words inscribed on clay tablets, humanity's very first writing, and in images in stone and clay, the tales from Mesopotamia cover many thousands of years. The scholars of Zechariah's time, and almost all of them today, consider those tales to be dreamed up fantasies. They took the things outside the scope of conventional thinking of that time, like genetic manipulation and gods who lived long and flew in aircraft. But Zechariah understood the tales differently. He realized that they were historical accounts, as astounding as they might be. Now, the story that Zechariah methodically assembled. In Africa, the primate line of hominins, all the Homo species, had evolved into small people with dark furry skins. They lived in small bands, made simple tools, hunted and gathered their food like the native peoples once did right here. What do we call them? Asked Art. Homo erectus. He dives into his tablet and finds images of those most evolved creatures in our ancestral primate line. Long ago, long ago, advanced people came down to Earth, settling first in southern Mesopotamia, where the rivers Tigris and Euphrates empty into an arm of the sea. They were very tall, yes, giants, and had light, smooth skin. And again, Art asks, what do we call them? To the Sumerians, the first of the Mesopotamian cultures, they were Anunnaki, meaning the heavenly ones on earth. Mandy pipes up. Doesn't that mean about the same as Nephilim in the Hebrew Bible? The ones who came down? Wow, thinks Grandpa. These kids don't miss a thing. So he goes on. The Anunnaki had learned there was gold on Earth and had made the long voyage to Earth desperate to find some. Desperate to get rich, eh? Smirks Art. Grandpa replies, no, not really, because gold was vital to their way of life. Their planet was too far from the sun to get any of its warmth. They could generate enough heat to sustain life, but they had to keep it from flying off into space. They came up with a brilliant idea, better than living in cities underground or inside domes on the surface. They launched a cloud of tiny gold particles high in the sky, surrounding the entire planet. You see, gold reflects heat perfectly. Art asks, like gold foil on a space probe, reflecting sunlight, keeping it cool? Right. The floating shell of gold particles kept their world warm until it started to thin out. Alas, they had mined all the gold on their world. There was none left. Disaster loomed. Art butts in. A planet way far from our sun? Is it the planet X that astronomers know is out there but haven't found yet? Smart kids indeed, thinks Grandpa. And he says, and it will be one big deal when they find it, sheathed all in gold. Now, the richest source of gold on Earth was in South Africa, where it still is. And there's still plenty there today. And like today, mining it involved hard, hot work. Eventually, the miners mutinied. Bad news for the homeworld. One of the leaders of the colony had an inspiration. They themselves had evolved from primitive hominins like the ones he'd seen nearby, near their mines in Africa. He figured they could craft a servant race in their lab by inserting their own genes into the wild creatures, jumping them ahead on their evolutionary tree. The laboratory hybrids they crafted were midway in looks and brains between the terrestrial creatures and themselves. They were the very first Homo sapiens. To help Art and Mindy link this story with what they are familiar with, Grandpa slips in a Bible lesson. In Genesis, it says, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. For a moment, the kids go silent. And then Mandy says, you mean the Bible has God saying what the Anunnaki must once have said? Right. In fact, the Mesopotamian tablets report the Anunnaki saying exactly that. Now, from Art, if this is really our true history, how come we've never heard any of it before and we're not learning about it in school? That's an important question, Art. Before I can speak to it, though, I've got to tell you more of the story. Some humans went off on their own from Africa, spreading over the planet, learning to live in harmony with nature, just as their terrestrial planet parent species had always done. They totally ignored in the Mesopotamian records. They became the indigenous tribes of Earth, guided in life by divine spirit. Our story, rather, has to do with the humans, the extraterrestrials, brought out of Africa to serve in the cities they had built in Mesopotamia and Egypt, in India and elsewhere. The Anunnaki were superior to the human population in so many ways, it was easy to convince them that their lords were divine beings. The people were enthralled with those self-proclaimed gods, their makers and their rulers. The lords from the heavens gave meaning and purpose to human life. It totally revolved around the Anunnaki lords, serving, obeying, worshiping, and eventually learning all the arts and sciences of civilization from them. It was glorious to serve the Anunnaki, even to die for them, for they had brought their warring ways to Earth from their home planet. With armies of devoted human followers, they fought forever wars for power, glory, and riches, sometimes intervening with their personal weapons. Mandy says, I saw a video about the Trojan War. Was it like that? Men fighting on the ground, gods in the sky? Grandpa gets profoundly sad thinking about how civilization became wrapped up in war, just as the Anunnaki had been. A terrible truth not to burden the kids with right then. He needs a break. Good thing it's lunchtime. Mandy and Otter lost in thought as they eat. They lead Grandpa back to the couch. They're eager to know where this story is heading. Art, you asked how come you're not learning any of this and how come hardly anyone seems to know anything about it at all. Let me ask you something. Have you ever experienced something you wished you could forget? Art looks glum. Like when I broke the picture window with a rock? Yeah, sure. Mandy sinks down looking glum. Clearly she's remembering something she wishes she didn't. Grandpa says, let's consider how life began for humanity, with two different parent species, utterly confused about their identity, shamed being so inferior to their rulers, traumatized through service in their wars. Forgetting our true origin would eliminate a lot of pain for us. It seems we've done a good job of doing just that. Mandy gets reflective. I saw a movie with a man in total amnesia after having had a terrible shock. Are you saying that's what happened to all humanity? Grandpa replies, seems so, but amnesia isn't total. Bits of memory poke through, and that's what's going on with the strange power of the number 12. Here's the key piece I've not told you yet. The highly stratified society of the Anunnaki was overseen by a council of the highest nobles, a circle of 12. Always 12 over thousands of years. If one of the ruling gods stepped aside, another one took their place. But how come 12? And why was that important? In Anunnaki science, the solar system was governed by the number 12. They counted 12 important heavenly bodies. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, plus the Sun, Moon, and their own planet, Planet X. As they viewed the band of the sky around the planets, they found a circle of 12 constellations, the signs of the zodiac. In fact, above and below the zodiac, they saw two more circles of 12 constellations. To their way of thinking, for their settlement on Earth to thrive, it had to be in harmony with the order of our planetary system. And for that to happen, it had to be overseen by a ruling circle of 12. For many thousands of years, the Anunnaki gods gave purpose and meaning to life for civilized humanity. But eventually they returned home, the last of them lifting off in the mid-6th century BCE. That left an enormous emptiness for the people of the cities. The kings and priests who'd taken over for them couldn't totally fill it on their own. What could they do? Rather than continuing to suffer that aching void, the Jews decided that the olden gods had been unimportant. Art's eyes go big. The first commandment, thou shalt not have other gods before me. Right. In biblical times, continuing to believe in the gods of Mesopotamia could be severely punished. Meanwhile, the Greeks and Romans went the other way. They said not much had changed. It was only that the gods were no longer to be seen, just glimpsed as statues. And guess what? The Greeks and the Romans both had circles of 12 supreme gods. 12 great deities had ruled over humanity so long, their number became imprinted on our DNA in our field. That's why having 12 of something feels right. We don't consciously remember why that's so, but that doesn't matter. Having 12 of something is just a bit like having 12 all-powerful, loving lords looking over us. It's a feeling that pokes through the curtain of amnesia that otherwise hides the story of our beginnings. In a way we can't explain, the number 12 is somehow comforting. As civilization developed further, when the chance to count by 12 came up, we took it. That was made easier by the fact that the Mesopotamians counted by 12, not by tens as we do. That helped the number 12 poke through our mass amnesia. Art looks puzzled. Grandpa, if humanity forgot everything you've told us, how come you know all about it? He smiles. Remember I told you that when Zechariah grew up, he wrote books about his discoveries? Well, I read them. That woke me up. Mandy is quiet, gazing at the 12 roses in the vase in the coffee table, while Art starts to finger the 12 notes in the middle octave on the piano. They look at each other with excitement. Holy cow, I can't wait to tell my teacher Monday. Me too, says Mandy. Grandpa smiles, wondering how, with their innocent enthusiasm, they'll deal with the sort of reception Zechariah got at their age. The end.
Wonderful.
So I
That
could
was
see,
great. Fantastic.
I could see that could be a short animated film, I think.
Yeah.
It just comes naturally. So
Right.
happy to you're the first ones to hear it. And that takes us to the end of our designated time. And my Apple Watch tells me it's time to stand up and move around. So I will do that.
Well, thanks so much. This was, I really enjoyed listening
Good.
to all that.
And well, what the heck? How many people get to my website? You know, so the story just got published. It's gonna be in an audio on the website. Sandy should post it in a few days. Okay. Any last thoughts before we say goodnight? Thank you all.
Have you heard?
Thank you.
Reeve, it's great that you could be with us. Jane, even though we didn't see you, we know you're there.
I'm here.
And,
Thank you. Bye. Thank
and
you.
we'll
Thank you.
see you in a month.